Hello, viewers. Welcome to tonight's stream. That started pretty late. Just something I can't control, something to do with servers, but better late than ever. And tonight, you are tuning in to see a special intro. It is a short film by Philippe Grammaticopoulos. It's called The Bellies, and it was created in 2009. So it's somewhat old, I'm going to say, not really, but to give you guys a better idea of what to expect and what it's kind of about, what the style really is, there's a lot of history to it, and I think it's very interesting. It's something that I'm going to be talking about in the near future. It's another really interesting cultural movement. It's called surrealism, and this is what you're going to be seeing. It's going to be a surrealist piece, surrealist animation. So just to give you guys a brief idea of what it is, again, I'm probably going to be going in a lot more detail at some point in the future. I'm going to have a stream dedicated just talking about this stuff, giving you guys more examples. So without further ado, let me show you guys some surrealism here. Now, the first few images you're going to see are going to be surrealism, and the images that follow, you guys will get a better idea. So surrealism is a culture movement in Europe in the aftermath of World War I, in which artists depicted unnerving, illogical scenes and developed techniques to allow the unconscious mind to express itself. A leader, André Breton, was explicit in his assertion that surrealism was above all a revolutionary movement. At the time, the movement was associated with political causes such as communism and anarchism. It was influenced by the Dada movement of the 1910s, and that's really interesting. It wasn't up until recently, when I watched this film, that I actually realized that Dada, which was referenced in Doom Patrol, if you guys are watching that series, it's a really fun, awesome series based on a comic book as well. And they do go into Dada, the sisterhood of Dada. They mentioned that in the series. I'm going to say it's towards the end, probably season 3, 2 or 3, or it starts getting into it at season 2 and then goes fully into it at season 3. So yeah, they mentioned that, and at the time I was like, something strange that Doom Patrol explores, but it's actually based on a real movement. It's a movement, French movement, back in 1910s, as I was mentioning. So developed in the reaction to World War I, the Dada movement consisted of artists who rejected all logic, reason, and aestheticism of modern capitalist society, instead expressing nonsense, irrationality, and anti-bourgeois protest in their works. Dadaist artists expressed their discontent towards violence, war, and nationalism, and maintained their political affinities with radical left-wing and far-left politics. So just to give you guys that brief introduction to it, over here you are seeing more so, I'm going to say, that surrealism, but to give you guys a better idea of like, here's another piece that is surrealist, and it's kind of like a combination of something that you would probably see in a dream. You know, there's a dream-like quality to it, but at the same time, it's based somewhat on reality. There's certain realistic elements as well, so it's a nice mix in between both. And as you can see, like the pages are slowly transforming into being birds, which I think is pretty cool. It's a beautiful painting. Here, following, this would be art done by Dadaist artists. So to them, it was a mixture. There was like collage. It was poetry as well as collage. It was sculpture. There was other forms of art as well. But as I mentioned, I'm not really going to get too much into it. I don't want to take time away from this short film. But it's still very unique. I absolutely love their combination. There's a lot of composition and color there. There are ideas behind it as well. As you can see at the top, it says Dada as a movement. But I think it's also kind of interesting how their political approach towards what was going on. And as you guys heard, they're expressing nonsense, irrationality, and anti-bourgeois sort of approach. This is something that you would find in far-right politics now. So it's almost as if though it came in circle, right? At the time, that was the approach, and I think in some ways it influenced social culture, social interaction. People wanted to be on the in, right, of these like artistic movements, of the Dada movements. And because of their erratic behavior, because of their irrationality and nonsense almost, and this sort of like illogical, irrational sort of approach to things. Now you find far-right politics and they're doing the exact same thing. So it's almost like there's always a step behind. You know, they're joining the bandwagon a little bit too late. Like this is way before, and now this is like their approach where they're just gaslighting everybody with nonsense, irrationality, just no logic in what they're saying and how they're behaving. They're absolutely crazy. But the difference is that their values lie or kind of correspond with their behavior. You know, it's crazy behavior. Whereas the Dadaist movement, they actually had morals. They actually had values. And as you hear, their values were towards left-wing politics. You know, the ideas that support multicultural interaction, support, socialist sort of endeavors. To just kind of generalize it, I'm going to say like just socialist ideas, things that favor people as opposed to favoring capitalism, which what you would have with these far rights. Anyways, so that's pretty much just kind of like an intro. So that way, when you guys are watching it, at least you have some sort of idea, and you could decipher things a little bit more. But anyways, without further ado, y'all, I'm gonna play this cool little short for you. So that was everybody. That was a little short film that I wanted to show you guys. And as you could see, it really did have, well, I'm going to say it had a lot of commentary there on capitalism. You know, that really was just pretty much about a capitalist. And if you notice at the beginning, everybody looks exactly the same, right? They're wearing the same clothes. They're uniformly eating, you know, exactly the same thing. And it just kind of represents that culture in a sense, like especially during that time, you know, with the idea of like how capitalism is and how it aligns also with fascism as well. You know, the idea that everything has to be organized and everybody has to be exactly the same and think and act the same to make sure that it all works out for this greater good that supposedly therefore. But you know, it's showing this guy who's basically kind of like this soulless dolt, you know, who's walking around and exploiting things. As you could see, he gets to the factory and he sees all those snails that he was eating prior. And it could be like substituted for other things, you know, what they're doing to actual animals as well. The fact that they're testing on animals. As you saw, like they were watching the scientist who looked exactly like them and acted and thought exactly like them. They were injecting this stuff, changing their DNA in order to make the snails a lot bigger in order to be able to eat more. So it's kind of very similar, you know, that's what they're doing to animals as well. They're injecting them with all sorts of hormones and antibiotics, making them a lot bigger so that way they could produce more, you know, again. with absolutely zero regard. And you saw how some of them were just like mocking the snail that was uh, in this like tiny little box, and everybody was laughing about it. So once again, showing this like sociopathic sort of culture where they derive pleasure from the misery of others. And eventually, him having the all the luxury of life, you could see him standing there surrounded by the product of his making, and then eventually, diving a little bit deeper into it and coming out the other side as the food for another capitalist, somebody who is a lot bigger, somebody who has a lot more money. And it's kind of like a metaphor for what happens, with some people who are jumping into it thinking that they're untouchable and they're these amazing things, only to become victims of somebody else who has the same exact principles, same exact values, by the nature of what this capitalist system produces. It produces people who behave that way. So if you're taught to think, act, and be a certain way, follow these certain ways, you're eventually going to become that, and then you're going to teach that to somebody else, and then somebody else is going to outdo you in that sort of behavior and that sort of acting and values and whatever else it is. So it becomes more and more toxic, basically. So somebody else is going to become even more toxic, and then the next generation is going to be even more toxic than that generation, because by the nature of those values, that's what they're perpetuating. They're basically saying nothing is more important than capital, nothing is more important than making money. Other people's concerns and miseries are either entertainment or none of our concern. We don't really care about any of that stuff. So because of that, that is what is being conditioned to people. It's going to produce more and more sociopathic people. So it was kind of interesting how he decided to get kind of curious, and you could look at that when he like stepped into that shell as a way of self-exploration. He dived into himself a little bit, and then started to realize his own behavior in a sense and how awful it is, right? He's seeing himself as the snail basically on a plate of some capitalist who's about to just make him his dinner, who's about to cut him open and then consume him. So he's like in horror, and he's trying to get away from that, obviously, and he's trying to put himself back into a place of sense of comfort, only to just, of course, being hounded by that capitalist and eaten. So it was just kind of like a play on all that stuff, I think. From my perspective, the way I saw it, that's just kind of what stood out to me about it. I think that's why I actually really liked it. And you could see even at the beginning when he is riding through, right? He's like the only one with this like really nice, luxurious green car. Everybody else is walking around or on their bikes. So you could see that it really is about this like the character is this like overindulgent capitalist, the sociopathic capitalist who doesn't really care about anything. And yeah, it just kind of goes on to that science lab scenario where they're showing, all that DNA stuff, and all of them look the same over there as well. So it's an incredibly toxic culture, and that film, being part of the surrealist movement, being part of like the Dadaist movement, is kind of sticking true to their values there of just having to expose or just trying to, I guess, show certain elements about how toxic that culture is. Well, anyways, that was pretty much it, y'all. I'm going to be uploading it after this stream. Unfortunately, today is going to be a shorter one for figure drawing basics. But of course, I'm going to be back tomorrow. I'm going to be doing more figure drawing basics at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. So I'm going to take a quick break, a 5-minute break, to prepare for the next stream, which is going to be coloring comics. I'm going to be coloring John Buscema's Conan the Barbarian. So make sure you stick around for that. welcome viewers to the Art Lounge Alley. This is Coloring Comics, part 44. And here is where I left off last week. So, getting done pretty much with this entire page, it seems. I might have to revisit it to obviously redo some of the details over here that you guys are seeing. My approach to coloring is a bit different. Well, it's very different. It's very different from the traditional way that comics were colored. You know, the way that they were done before was they would do the inks over the pencils. Obviously, they would send them in to get photographed, and they were photographed, like the inks were photographed on top of what is that? Acetate paper. So it's like transparent plastic paper, and that would be the very top layer, and then underneath it they would have basically reproductions of it where people would just color in those areas that, like, for example, if this is the photocopy, they would just color it in, and then they would layer on top of it the ink, the inked acetate paper. So that way all the colors underneath it are also layered one on top of each other, to have a mixture of certain colors. So for example, for orange, they would have like yellow and red combined together, and then they would layer them one on top of each other to have that sort of effect. So at the time, their approach was very different than, of course, what it is now. What it is now is a lot more simple. But the way I'm doing it, obviously, I'm not photocopying it, not using acetate paper, so my layering process is a little bit more laborious, I guess. I have to, well, first I have to do the colors, and then I would have to come back and revisit with inks to redefine those little details. So anyways, just a quick idea of what the process was like. And I'm gonna start off, I'm pretty much used to having a certain approach when it comes to these India inks, and how I fill up this tray that I have over here. I'm following the same pattern. Kind of makes it easier. I did clean it, so there's going to be a little bit more. I think they're going to be a little bit more liquidy. And I guess the good news is that they won't dry as quickly. Ooh, that is gross. That looks so gross. Gloppy inks. And the fact that it was red didn't make it any better. Alright, what do we got next? We got brown. It's kind of why I shake it, but even if I shake it, the color ends up being more dense at the bottom. And it kind of dries at the bottom, so I'm guessing that's why. I think it's gloppy. The only downside I'm going to say to this, these bottles, is that the tip, right? It's not completely airtight. So over time, I'm guessing the inks do dry. Now, it's one of the reasons why an old bottle that I had ended up drying so fast. I didn't realize it. But it lasted a good amount of time. This is the black India ink, and you could see how at the bottom it just kind of concentrated. I read that if you pour in some rubbing alcohol in there, mix it with rubbing alcohol, I think. I'm not sure if there's any water involved. I'm pretty sure it's probably just rubbing alcohol that it's supposed to make it pliable again, but it's just not as I don't think the colors are as good as they are originally. All right, so what do we got there? I need some purple. That's gonna be a big one. I think the results today are going to be interesting because, as I mentioned, there's a little bit of water in these little tray compartments, so I don't know, I might not have to do a lot of mixing here. Mixing with water, that is. Alright, we're ready to go. So I'm gonna start out with doing their coats. And that's gonna be some purple. I'm gonna say it's like a washed out purple. I'm gonna dedicate one area of the palette to just purple, mixing dark colors, I guess, mixing dark colors. How does that look? I think it needs a little bit more white and a tiny bit of black. Man, tiny bit of black isn't tiny at all. Like, I just barely touched it and the color became incredibly dark. But by the looks of it, I think I'm gonna need more water actually. I thought it would be enough, but it's not. It's a very delicate process. I mean, you really have to be very precise about how much of everything you're using. Like whether it's color or whether it's water. So I got this little squeeze bottle here that has some water. I'm gonna add that to a compartment on the palette. I'm gonna use it to just water down these colors a bit more. I want the colors to last. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I'm using water in addition, is so that I can use the color longer, because it seems to wash out very quickly or dry it very quickly. So this time I'm going to try to mix a lot more, and maybe that will help. Mix a lot more colors, or use a lot more paint rather. Let's see if that helps. Because usually I put very, very little on the brush. And I think that's the way to go about it. if you mix more colors or use more ink. And since this is probably going to be the last page until I start new panels, and the new panels I haven't inked. At least I don't think I have, actually. Let me just take a look and see what the next panels are and if they're inked or not. Yeah. So I think I'm going to try with these panels to go straight to color and then do inks on top of them. I'm just trying to figure out, like, how can I do it? Either that, or I think what I would have to do is the way I did it here. So two options, really. Either I do it over the pencils and see if I could just work the inks on top of it, or I just do the inks and then just redo them again, like how I'm gonna do with these panels here. Depending on how quickly I do this, I could very well be doing that today. Either re-inking these panels or trying out this new method with colors. For those of you who actually did check out the previous stream, the special intro, where I played you guys that short film, it's kind of interesting, actually, now that I think back on it. Like, I came to the realization that the capitalist there was actually like the food at the end. You know, before, when I looked at it the first time, I was just like, oh, it's just, you know, the Dadaist kind of way of telling story. And then once I gave it a little bit more thought, I was like, oh, it's kind of like karma there, you know, or it's kind of like this metaphorical idea of like how once you thought you're untouchable, only to find yourself to be the subject of your own making, basically. You know, he became the food for somebody else who took on the same principles and values. He found himself to be the victim. So it was just like a cool way to display karma. Or at least that's how I interpret it. And I think that's one of the best things. You know, this is something that I talk about often, is that even with things like the Dadaists and in surrealism, is that it's not only meant to describe what the artist is thinking, it's just meant to inspire thought, you know, interpretation and imagination, to come up with your own interpretation of what is presented. It's just, in some ways, it's like trying to add fuel to the fire being your imagination. So I kind of took it in like multiple interpretations, as a interpretation of karma, of how you reap what you sow, kind of. If you are backing this sociopathic culture, how it's going to come back to you through somebody else. So the way that you are acting ripples through, and then eventually somebody does what you were doing to others, to you. And I think that's more likely to be in that culture, in that capitalistic culture, because they don't care about anything. The only thing they care about is money and themselves. Money, power, and fame. And they derive pleasure from other people's misery. So, perpetuating that culture, teaching more and more people these values, ends up coming back to them when they find themselves to be at crossroads, when they find themselves to be in terrible scenarios. Well, and the culture that they've been fueling ends up treating them the way that they were treating people. It's like, what do you expect? You tell people, that, well, this is how it is. We don't care about anything. If you're not making us money, you're nothing and you're worthless. So why would you expect all the people that you've been teaching and conditioning to behave this way to actually come back and see things differently? I mean, it's perpetuated in schools, through these sororities and fraternities and all that other stuff, like the form of hierarchy and the whole idea of superior, inferior, and how those who are inferior are just used and casted out, used and disposed. So at some point, they're going to be quote unquote inferior, and they're going to be used and disposed. So you can't feel bad then, because that's what you were passing on to other people. That's what older people were passing on to younger people, and so on and so forth. It's going to be an entire nation of basically sociopathic behavior. And when they find themselves to be at crossroads, well, sucks for that. I don't agree with that. I don't support that culture at all whatsoever. I think it's repulsive. In fact, that's the entire reason why the pandemic happened. It was just day after day, year after year of people taking shortcuts, doing things to make more money. If it meant that, let's say that there's disease that's being spread, let's say because in slaughterhouses there's like all these awful conditions for the animals themselves, the people, the workers there, and that disease gets put into the food, and then the food is being sent out to supermarkets and people eat it. Before you know it, it's passed on. That's where a lot of disease actually comes from. People work in those conditions. They can't take sick leave, can't take paid sick leave. Another recent catastrophe as well. So they go into work, they're sick, they pass it to other people. Those people pass it to other people, animals as well, and who knows? There's all sorts of stuff. Why? Because capital. Because they need to make more money. And of course, they're not going to give that person time to heal up. So that person will just come in spite of that situation, and pass it around to people. Passing around all this disease. Companies dumping oil and dumping all this other stuff into toxic stuff into the water, as opposed to paying more money for it to be disposed of properly in ways that's not harmful to all those things. Companies lobbying against other companies that ensure those processes are safe and that they're not taken in that approach. Nuclear waste that creates mutating viruses, basically. So that's being dumped into water because people are trying to take shortcuts and make more money. And you get a mutating virus. And, you know, capitalism, free market, so private businesses should be able to do whatever they want, right? They should be able to dump all that stuff in water, have unsafe and dirty conditions in areas where people are making food or creating quote-unquote food, or like just abusing poor animals, defensive animals, when you don't need to do that. There's lots of other ways to get your nutrition. Yeah, it's incredibly toxic culture in multiple ways. And that level of intolerance, like, oh God, you know, this isn't about making money. I don't care what you have to say about it. You know, that sociopathic sort of state of mind also ripples through society, and more people end up, because, you know, they're working in those sort of conditions, they're conditioned to think, act, and behave the same way. So you get more and more people who are indifferent to all these atrocities that happen all around the world. So unsustainable and repulsive culture, basically. Defunding schools, you know, something I mentioned before. In Philadelphia, they've closed down district officials, politicians in districts. They would close down schools so that they could save themselves millions of dollars a year, annually. So destroying education systems because that creates more profit from them. Capitalism is just greed, basically. It's you know, there's a reason why it's considered to be a sin. It's not just, oh, you're gonna get a slap on the wrist when you go up into the sky and meet this creator. No, it ripples through society and creates sick, insane people. You know, that's why it's one of them. Because a person who becomes incredibly greedy and rich and so on and so forth, their behavior, as you could see, it becomes very becomes toxic, because more and more people try to emulate it in order to try and become like them so that they can be rich and famous and not have to be subjugated to all this awful stuff. So the more and more people are replicating those behaviors, the more awful society gets, the more awful the environment gets. It's a chain of events that happens. Hubris, you know, it's another one. It's the same idea. If one person becomes incredibly arrogant and starts to justify their behavior whatever way they can, creating atrocities, wars, killing people, killing a bunch of innocent lives because they shouldn't be questioned. It ripples through society. More and more people end up joining that behavior, that outlook, And then we get all this insane behavior where strangers are killing strangers because somebody else with a lot of money and influence and power or whatever these like social constructs are enough for somebody to go out there and kill a complete stranger, somebody they never talked to, they never got to know. Doesn't matter. Instantly death. Something that nobody knows what's going to happen afterwards, you know? Insane people, basically. A form of insanity that starts to take over. There's nothing normal about it. There's nothing justifiable about it. You know, there's like something I was talking about before, this idea how we have like trials for murderers, right, and rapists and all this other stuff. Like people are, you know, the Jeffrey Dahmers or whatever, they're put on trial and people are like, oh my God, that's so crazy, that's so unnatural, that's so insane, yada yada. But then when it comes to some sort of nut job who goes into an office, gets a bunch of money and gets a position, a title, basically, you know, it's not like they end up being touched by some sort of supreme being who created all this and tells them like, you are now in charge of the world. No, it's just these things that happen. They get a title. You know, they basically corrupt their way to that position, and suddenly whatever they say goes. So if they go and tell people, like, go and murder a bunch of innocent lives, you know, go and bomb cities that have like a bunch of kids there as well, just because I've earned this title. And people are like, okay, I'm going to go and do that. It's absolutely insane. I mean, granted, of course, there are people who already want to do those kind of things and they're just waiting for somebody to enable that for them. You know, there are people who are mentally sick. You know, they've become so hate-filled and, you know, they're misplacing their anger, which is predominantly having to do with themselves. You know, their bratty behavior that gives them absolutely no happiness. In fact, it does the opposite. So that instead of fixing their own point of view or their behavior or their outlook, they blame others as a way to alleviate any responsibility of having to change or improve. And they'll go as far as like hating those people when really that hate is towards themselves. Yeah, so they're projecting. It's a form of projection. And they just need something in order to feel better about themselves in some way. And it never lasts. Notice, like, it's not like it happened once and that's good enough. Like, no, they do it over and over and over again. It's because they have unresolved issues. And they're looking at everything else other than themselves. They're pointing at everything else other than themselves. So they keep doing it over and over and over again. And that's how it turns into a psychosis. It's this like delusional sort of reality that they choose to live in as a way to avoid responsibility and avoid having to look at things in a healthy perspective or get some help, you know, or whatever it is, put themselves in a position of actually being happy. But I'm not going to say it's only that. I think it's also systematic, you know, because most people, they don't have time to themselves. They barely have any time to themselves. And I think by the nature of that reality, it creates a lot of frustration because people are trying to do as much as they can within the short period of time that they have. And that also just like creates problems, or creates friction because like, oh, if I'm trying to get something done within like half an hour and somebody is like cutting me off or creating some sort of issues or is trying to make some sort of demands, I'm getting more frustrated not me personally, I don't have that, but like I'm getting more frustrated because it's getting in the way of me getting that done so that I have enough time to actually go and do something I want to do. So then they start getting pissed off at other people because of this reality, and that turns into all sorts of stuff. But if people had more time, I think, like not more time to do more work, but more time so that they could actually enjoy themselves, have time to rest and spend time with family and friends or whatever it is, hobbies that you're into. But for those who want to exploit people, who get off on things like that, again, having to do with low self-esteem, that's how they feel better about themselves, because that's why they need to control people so that they could feel powerful, because they really don't feel powerful. Or they need to feel powerful because they don't feel powerful. They create these systemic ways to keep people agitated, making them more exploitable. It's a huge problem. And people need to work together to change that. As I mentioned, the idea that this might be the only life any of us get, and for it to be spent on making other people rich, barely having time to enjoy ourselves, doesn't sound like the best way to spend with that one single opportunity. So I think people need to come together and start protesting, start creating problems for all these rich psychos. If it's not crazy to demand people to go back to work in the middle of a worldwide killer virus so that they could make more profit, I don't know what is. Like, at what point are you going to consider something insane then? They're basically telling people to go out there, catch a killer virus, spread it around so that more people can die because it's a killer virus, so that they can say, this quarter we made $1 billion. That's insane. What's the difference between that and a mass murderer killing for pleasure? Isn't profits pleasure for them? You know, what's the difference between that and somebody who murders a bunch of people and gets off on that? Don't we lock away people like that? Don't we put them on trial and say that they're insane and they go to jail for the rest of their life? Or the same people who are supporting the system, who are pro the death penalty, I mean, if it's about morals, well, where are the morals there? You know, isn't that all the complete opposite? And it's funny how they think like, oh, those people who support the capitalist system and they support this like right-wing extreme bullshit, they start talking about morality. Meanwhile, they're like sexist. They want to kill people who are not serving their capital, first of all, not serving their company, not serving them more money. They want to kill those people. They're sexist, so, you know, that's another thing. They're racist as well. They don't like other races. They're exploiting, lying, and manipulating people. And it's as if though they think like if they get to the pearly gates, that they're going to be met by the creator, and the creator is going to be like, oh, so you did all these things, you exploited people, you told them all to go and kill themselves and kill their kids and family members so that you could make more money. You lied and manipulated your way in order to have more money, which is greed, basically. you considered yourself better than the opposite sex. So you considered yourself better than other races and nationalities with your white supremacy, which is hubris, basically. So you didn't follow any of the things that I told you not to do. You didn't follow any of them. You just talked about it. You just said to people that that's what you believe in, but you didn't actually do any of those things. Welcome to have, like, it's absolutely delusional. Like the amount of delusion in these people is just overwhelming. It's insane. Well, first of all, there's absolutely delusional people, and then there's people who are just bullshitting, pretending that they actually believe that stuff so that they could get religious people to back them. And since that's a real that's a huge percentage of people, of course they're going to want that. Of course they're going to lie their way, again, to like corrupt and manipulate people so that they could get votes, which means money, right? If they get enacted, they get all this immunity, they get all this benefits, they could stuff the pockets, all our taxes, they could just take in, sell us a bunch of bullshit saying it's for this, that, and the other. Brainwashed media that they're also in the pockets of as well. Of course they're gonna do that. So it's a mixed bag of all that. So yeah, to think that at some point, like I read comments from people and they're talking about, we need to enact this, we need to do this, we have to fight for this sort of thing within politics. And I'm like, look, if you think for a moment any of these people are going to want to make you less dependent on them, you're fooling yourself. Like, they spent their entire lives trying to get in a position that's going to give them all this exploitable opportunity. And they did it by manipulating and lying and exploiting people as well. Do you really think they're going to do something so that they won't be in that position anymore? So this corruption has been going on for such a long time. Do you really think that they're going to sacrifice that? And that's one of the reasons why we've been going in circles. Like, if you pay attention to what politics were like in the 60s, there was that huge period of protesting, and people were, going against what was going on politically. The wars that were going on, people were against that. They were trying to improve the economy. The education system were terrible. Pay was terrible. Again, it wasn't up to speed with what the economy was like, what the demand was. There was racism still, there was sexism still. Women were looked down upon even for more, I'm gonna say, or about the same. It's just under a guise now. So all those years, 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s were okay, I'm gonna say. That was the only period. But then the 2000s with Bush, and then after that, Obama being all right, making things a little bit better, and then again. So it's always it's like one step forward, two steps back kind of scenarios for years. So 60s, 70s, 80s, like 4 or 5 decades of the same stuff. And people are like, we need to go and actually do something within this government system and try to improve things and fight for changes and so on and so forth. It's a waste. It's a waste of time. There need to be hard protests. People have to protest daily. The same way that it was done in Iran, or is being done in Iran. In order for there to be change, it has to be done by the people. We cannot depend. People have been depending on it for generations now, and now they're old. They spent all that time trying to get some progress, and what progress? The only progress was their age. Everything else gets reverted. So all those years that they've dedicated themselves thinking that they're doing something that's really going to improve things ends up being thrown out with the wrong person in politics. With the wrong person taking the Senate or just Congress in general, all out the window. And again, they're going to defend those positions. They're not going to be like, yeah, let me just, I guess so. And unless people really start to create havoc through all the protesting, demanding change, shutting down the economy, shutting down their profits. That's the only way they're going to listen. That's the only thing they care about. So unless that is their position, all that is going to be taken away from them, they don't care. They're going to keep doing things the way they've been doing for decades now. It's an absolute waste of time trying to think that it can be done through the government system. I do value the government. I think it's absolutely necessary. I just don't think that meaningful change that's going to really improve people's lives is going to be done through that. Not with what's been created. I don't think that Democrats have been aggressive enough, if they're even really interested in improving the lives of the people. They are wings. It is a left and right wing. And it's not like one wing is fighting another. They both need to be flapping in order to keep the body moving. So sometimes I wonder, like, the people who claim to be for the people, are they actually, or they're just in it for themselves and the position that they're in? But that's not an answer that we're ever going to really get, or that's really going to be popular. I'm aware of it, but I don't think it's just popular consensus, basically. And it's a waste of time trying to figure that out. What's important is creating the change that's going to benefit people. They're like, people are like cheering, like, now that some athletic celebrity is brought back to the country because they were treated so poorly, and now they're back here and people are cheering. And I'm like, well, that's great, but really what you should be focused on is improving your life, or improving the economy, improving the fact that you're spending 2 hours out of 24 for yourself. Everything else is going for these exploitive companies and politicians. Like, that's what you should be really focused about. That's what you should be demanding. They're like, oh, what is that? What is that thing that recently came up? I guess it's like gay marriage. That's great. That was there before, but it was taken away and then put back in place. And people are celebrating as if though that's progress. It was there before. So I kind of wonder, like, was that a staged thing? Political stunt to make it seem as if though things are getting better. Progress. It's like, no, progress would mean that there was a step forward. This was a step forward by making gay marriage and interracial marriage normal. That was a step forward years ago, a long time ago. And then they turned it into this whole fiasco. So that's 2 steps back. And then they signed it back into law. That's 1 step forward. Is that progress? That's being in the same place as you were before. That's not progress. Progress would mean that there was some step forward. All right, so I'm done with this, and I'm going to try and... I'm moving on to this page here. So I'm going to try to do this panel, as I was talking about before. I'm going to try to do it over the pencils. And see how that's going to work out. I don't know, y'all. I think this is gonna be like, I'm just gonna do it over this area. I guess I could kind of still see it, so it's not too bad. It doesn't cover it up completely. But that's a thin layer. So I'm gonna have to like keep it pretty thin in order to be able to see the detail still. Yeah, I guess it kind of works. But yeah, with very thin layers. I also think it's kind of important to highlight how, you know, from the previous stream, that special intro that I was talking about, the Dada movement, surrealism, how a lot of it was coming from political views. You know, political is also philosophical. It's people's outlook on life, you know, outlook on how people should be treated, how people should interact with one another, what are our values, you know. So that's all, it's intertwined, you know. The whole political philosophical realm is intertwined. You can't have politics without philosophy. And art is heavily reliant on philosophy, I'm going to say. I mean, there's also just art that's about aesthetic, right? Just something that looks beautiful, but even that is subjective because it really depends. What one person might find to be beautiful, another person might not, you know, and that really ties into what they enjoy and why. You know, so right there, just on this idea of like what is beautiful, that's already getting into a philosophical concept, you know, and that how heavily influences people's opinions and outlooks. So there's no way to really escape that in some ways. It's all tied into it, even with music. It's the same idea. We're running out of a very important color, which is white. Use lots of this stuff. Mixing a good amount of purple just so that it doesn't dry so fast on me. And I think I just have to add white onto the canvas. Because this purple is still pretty dark in comparison to the original. I think what's also making this challenging is the pencil. The pencil is blue lead, so it's kind of compared to the purple. It's making it look a little darker, but I think once I would put on like the inks, the purple is gonna look light. I've yet to find out, but I'm gonna do this entire panel like this. All the colors are going to be done with no inks. Well, it's slowly coming to an end, ladies and gents. I hope you enjoyed the special intro as much as I did. I had a great time watching it with you guys. If you guys have any questions, if you have any comments about it, what is your point of view? What did you see when you were watching that? Share it in chat. You know, that could be something interesting to discuss. Also, just going back on what I was talking about, I want you guys to take some time and picture what it would be like for those of you who are working, or for those of you who are slowly getting into that whole that world. What it would be like if you were to come home every day after 5 hours of work. The main question, why can't that be a reality? And what can we do to actually make that a reality? Because as I mentioned, these companies are making trillions of dollars that they're stuffing their pockets with, while people who are providing them with this sort of thing are barely able to just enjoy their life or enjoy their time. Neither of those things. And should that continue, and why? But predominantly, just picture what your life would be like if you were to just work 5 hours. What you would do with that time when you would get home, and then take the time and remind yourself what it's like now. I think that's a really important step for people to recognize that where their life is going. You know, despite putting in time and effort and work and getting absolutely nothing for it. And it absolutely doesn't have to be that way. We just have to come together. There's billions of us, only maybe 100,000 of those type of exploiters. If billions of people come together and we start creating these protests like people did back in the 1800s when they demanded 8 hours instead of 11 to 16 or 11 to 13 hours a day. If they were able to do it back then, we sure as hell can do it now. And I'm sure at that time people were like, oh, you know, there's going to be inflation, there's going to be this, that, and the other, and they're going to come up with all sorts of stupid answers. Back then, they were doing the same exact thing. Do you think that they were ready for that instantly? You know, there was a reason why people had to protest and why the economy had to be shut down. It was because they were met with a bunch of no's. But people stuck to it, and they're like, listen, I want to enjoy my life. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to do it again. And I'm not going to dedicate that to just making your life much, much better. I'm not going to dedicate that to making you rich while I'm barely able to get by and I'm getting old. You know, why should you get that opportunity at my expense? And they ended up protesting and, yeah, shutting down the economy. Eventually, it was signed into law that it was 8 hours instead of 11. But since then, it's just escalated. So, you know, you give them an opportunity and you just relax, and what do? They continue to exploit things. You know, that's how it ended up coming back to another position of people just getting incredibly exploited. It was over years and years. It wasn't overnight. It wasn't just now. This has been going on for, as I mentioned, decades. 60s, 70s, and 80s brought us to what it is now. And minimum wage lost its value by over 40% since 2009, I'm going to say. So what you were able to get by minimum wage back in 2009 is was a lot more affordable than what it is now. All right, everybody, so that does it for tonight. I am going to be coming back tomorrow for more figure drawing basics. Hopefully server issues are going to be resolved by then. But just note, I'm always going to be streaming, so even if I don't work things out, eventually I'm going to be streaming once I do within that period. So make sure you check back in. I'm going to be doing figure drawing basics at 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, and then at 9 p.m. it's going to be the project stream. And then Friday is going to be another special intro. It's going to be a continuation of Gil Elfgren. I'm going to be talking about 2 more artists, I believe, who influenced him. I'm going to be showing you guys more paintings, talking about that stuff, as you guys have been seeing in the previous ones. If you've missed out on the previous ones, you have time to catch up by heading over to the video section and filtering it based on collection, where you will see folders pop up. There's one that's called Special Streams, and you'll find Gil Elfgren parts 1 through 8, I believe, now on Twitch, for you guys to catch up and see what you missed. And I believe Friday is going to be the last one, depending on how quickly I go through all that stuff. And I'm going to move on then to show you guys the book, the Gil Elfgren book. I'm going to show you guys more of Gil Elfgren's work and show you the decades that he's been painting. It's interesting to see all that progress. So make sure you tune in then. It's going to be at 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. That special intro is going to be at 9 p.m. This coming Friday. So thanks for tuning in, everybody. If you enjoyed this content, just remember, hit the like and subscribe button. They're both greatly appreciated by yours truly. And I'll see you tomorrow.